It was an ordinary morning in the city, the kind of day where people hurried to their jobs, children laughed on their way to school, and the streets buzzed with life. Hidden among the crowd was a man who did not look very different from anyone else. His clothes were plain, his shoes simple, and his face carried no signs of the wealth he owned. Few would ever guess that beneath this humble appearance was a millionaire, a man who had built his empire with patience, discipline, and a deep belief in hard work. Yet today, he was not stepping into the role of a businessman or a leader. Today, he wanted to walk as a common man and see life from the eyes of ordinary people. He had learned long ago that when people knew who he was, they treated him differently. They smiled brighter, their words were more careful, and their actions seemed polished. But he wanted to see the truth. He wanted to know how his stores were running when no one expected the owner to show up. And so, with a simple jacket over his shoulders and a cap that shadowed his eyes, he quietly entered one of his busiest stores. It was not the grandest one, but it had always held a special place in his heart. This was the store he had opened in the early years, back when money was tight and every customer mattered. The store was alive with the sound of activity. Shopping carts rattled against the tiled floor, soft music floated from the speakers, and people moved in every direction. To anyone else, it was just another day in a busy place. But to him, every small detail mattered: the way the employees spoke, the way the shelves were stocked, even the mood of the customers. He walked slowly, pretending to browse, while his sharp eyes caught things others missed. There was a faint heaviness in the air, a quiet nervousness among the staff that did not sit right with him. As he moved closer to the front counters, his ears picked up a voice that was louder than the rest. It was sharp, cold, and carried a tone of superiority. He turned slightly, pretending to look at a shelf of cereal boxes, and saw the manager standing behind one of the cash registers. The manager was tall, dressed neatly in a suit that was almost too formal for the store, and wore an expression that seemed more like a mask than a smile. His words, however, were far from polite. They cut through the room, directed at a young cashier who stood quietly, scanning items with trembling hands. The cashier was a young black woman, perhaps in her early 20s, with tired eyes that spoke of long hours and little rest. Yet even in her exhaustion, there was dignity in the way she carried herself. She greeted every customer with a soft hello and tried to keep her voice steady. But the manager's harsh comments kept falling on her like blows. "You're too slow," he snapped loud enough for customers to hear. "Why can't you get it right the first time? Look at the line building up because of you." The cashier lowered her head, whispering an apology, and tried to speed up her work. Her hands shook as she handled the money, her cheeks burning with embarrassment while people in line exchanged uncomfortable glances. The disguised millionaire felt his heart tighten. He had seen people make mistakes before, but mistakes were part of learning. What he witnessed now was not correction, it was humiliation. The manager's voice carried no kindness, no patience, only pride and cruelty. The millionaire watched closely. The young woman was not lazy. She was working as best as she could, balancing the heavy flow of customers and the weight of the manager's scorn. And yet, she did not raise her voice, did not argue back, did not allow her frustration to spill onto the customers. Instead, she continued to treat each person in front of her with respect, even while she herself was being disrespected. He walked a little closer, still pretending to shop, and noticed how the other employees reacted. Some kept their heads down, avoiding the scene, afraid perhaps that if they spoke up, they too would be targets of the manager's anger. Others looked sympathetic but powerless, their eyes filled with quiet worry. No one dared to interfere. The air carried the heavy silence of people who had seen this happen before but had learned to stay quiet. It was not only the cashier who was living under this shadow. The entire team seemed bound by the same fear. The millionaire's thoughts drifted back to his own younger days. He had once been just like that cashier, working long hours for little pay, hoping to be treated fairly. He remembered how a kind word from a boss had lifted his spirits, and how cruelty had left scars that lasted longer than money ever could. Watching the scene before him, he felt both anger and sadness. Anger that someone who represented his store could act this way, and sadness that this young woman had to endure such pain while doing her job. He wondered how many times she had gone home with silent tears, wondering if her hard work was worth it. Customers began to shuffle uncomfortably in the line. A mother whispered to her child to stay quiet, an elderly man shook his head but said nothing, and a young couple looked at each other with pity. They all saw what was happening, but like the employees, they chose silence. The cashier's eyes glistened as she tried to blink away the tears, her lips pressing into a thin line as she held her emotions back. Every second felt heavier, and the millionaire knew this was more than just an isolated outburst. This was a wound that had been left open for too long. He tightened his grip on the small shopping basket he carried, forcing himself to stay calm. His disguise gave him the power of invisibility, but it also gave him the chance to see the truth without filters. He wanted to observe more, to understand fully how deep this problem ran before revealing himself. His chest, however, burned with the desire to step forward and stop the humiliation immediately. Yet, he stayed still, eyes fixed on the cashier, heart filled with quiet resolve. In that moment, the millionaire made a silent promise to himself. He would not let this go unseen. He would not allow cruelty to stain the very business he had built with the dream of fairness and respect. The young cashier's quiet dignity in the face of pain would not be wasted. Something would change, and soon. And as the store carried on, with carts moving and items being scanned, one man in disguise stood quietly in the corner, his mind already shaping the storm that was about to unfold. The minutes stretched on, and the disguised millionaire continued to watch the scene unfold in front of him. The young cashier, though hurt by the sharp words of the manager, kept her head bowed and her hands moving. Each beep of the scanner sounded like a small cry, a reminder of the weight she was carrying. Customers placed their items down with hesitation, unsure whether to comfort her or remain silent. The manager, however, seemed to enjoy his role of authority far too much. His voice rang across the store again and again, louder than the soft music and louder than the hum of busy footsteps. It was clear that this was not just about correcting mistakes. This was about power. The millionaire noticed how the manager stood, tall and stiff, with an air of superiority that made even confident customers shrink a little. He criticized the cashier for scanning too slowly, for greeting customers too softly, even for the way she handed back change. Nothing she did seemed enough. When she offered a smile, he said it looked fake. When she tried to hurry, he complained she was careless. Every move she made was met with another biting comment, and yet she endured, her quiet spirit refusing to break completely. The millionaire's mind worked quickly as he observed. He knew the signs of a bully. This manager did not care about the business, nor about customers, nor about teamwork. He cared about control and feeding his own pride. The more nervous the cashier looked, the stronger the manager seemed to become. It was a pattern he had seen before in the world of business: those who rise by pushing others down instead of lifting them up. One particular moment struck him deeply. An older woman in line, holding a small basket of groceries, dropped a coin on the counter by mistake. The cashier bent down quickly to pick it up, but before she could even return it, the manager snapped, "You're wasting time again. Do you think customers want to stand here all day watching you crawl on the floor?" His voice was sharp, his words heavy with mockery. The elderly woman frowned, clearly uncomfortable, and softly told the cashier, "It's all right, dear, don't worry." But the cashier only nodded, returning the coin with trembling hands. The millionaire felt anger rising inside him, but he kept it hidden behind calm eyes. He wanted to see how far this cruelty would go, not because he enjoyed watching it, but because he needed to understand just how poisoned the store's atmosphere had become. It was not only about one person, it was about the entire system. If the manager could treat an employee like this in front of customers, what must he be doing behind closed doors? His attention shifted for a moment to the other employees. Near the produce section, a young stockboy avoided looking at the register altogether. At the bakery corner, two workers whispered quietly, their expressions filled with sympathy but also fear. It was obvious they had all witnessed scenes like this before. Perhaps some had even been in the cashier's place. Yet none dared to challenge the manager. Their silence spoke louder than words. They knew that standing up might cost them their jobs. The millionaire walked slowly toward another aisle, pretending to browse a row of canned goods, but his ears stayed tuned to the manager's voice. Each word was like a hammer, breaking down the confidence of a young woman who was only trying to do her job. He thought about how hard it must have been for her. Maybe she worked late nights after classes, or maybe she supported her family with this job. Perhaps she dreamed of building a better life but found herself trapped in an environment where she was disrespected daily. The thought made him ache inside. At that moment, he noticed something remarkable. Despite the humiliation, despite the tears she was holding back, the cashier never once turned her frustration onto the customers. She thanked them softly, wished them a good day, and even smiled through her pain. Her dignity shone brighter than the cruelty thrown at her. This quiet strength touched the millionaire deeply. It reminded him of his own mother, who had worked long shifts in a small shop when he was young. She too had faced harsh words from bosses who never saw her worth, yet she carried herself with grace, refusing to let anyone steal her self-respect. The millionaire's jaw tightened. He knew then that this was more than just an issue of poor management. This was a test of character, his own and that of his company. Would he allow someone like this manager to remain in a position of power, spreading fear and humiliation? Or would he act, even if it meant causing a storm in the middle of a busy day? The answer was clear in his heart, but he held it for now. He wanted the truth of this man's nature to reveal itself fully, not only to him but to everyone watching. The line at the register grew longer, and with it, the tension in the air. The manager became even more impatient. He raised his voice again, scolding the cashier for a tiny mistake when she gave a customer an extra plastic bag. "Do you think we're running a charity here?" he barked. The customer, embarrassed, tried to hand the bag back, but the cashier quietly shook her head and told her it was fine. That small kindness contrasted so sharply with the manager's cruelty that a few people in line exchanged uneasy glances. Still, no one spoke. The millionaire understood the silence well. He knew the weight of fear, the hesitation of ordinary people who wished to help but worried about the consequences. Yet he also knew that silence allowed injustice to grow. He himself had stayed silent in his early years, not daring to challenge those who treated him poorly. But experience had taught him that silence was as harmful as cruelty itself. Watching this unfold, he felt the old ache of his own past, the sting of words spoken to him when he had no power to respond. As the minutes dragged on, the manager's tone grew harsher, and the cashier's eyes grew heavier with the effort of holding back tears. But in her quiet endurance, the millionaire saw something powerful. She was not weak. She was strong in a way the manager could never understand. She did not fight back with words or anger, but with patience, dignity, and kindness. That kind of strength, he thought, was worth more than all the money in his bank. The millionaire's heart was no longer calm. He knew he could not stay silent much longer. The disguise he wore allowed him to see the truth, but it also gave him a responsibility. To witness cruelty and do nothing was to become part of it. As he tightened his grip on his basket, he made up his mind. Soon, very soon, he would step forward. The manager believed he was in control, but that illusion was about to break. The truth would be revealed, and justice would find its way into the store. For now, though, he remained in the shadows, watching as the story reached a boiling point. The cashier, though weary, stood tall in her quiet way. The manager, lost in his pride, had no idea that his every word, his every action, was being measured by the very man who held his future in his hands. And so the millionaire waited, his heart heavy but his spirit firm, knowing that the moment of revelation was drawing near. The store bustled with life, but for the disguised millionaire, everything had narrowed down to one corner, the register where the young cashier stood. Time seemed to move slowly as he observed the unfolding drama. His disguise allowed him to blend in with the customers, yet inside his mind, he was deeply alert, noticing every detail that others brushed aside. The cashier, though shaken by the manager's constant scolding, continued to serve each customer with a gentle voice. Her smile trembled at the edges, but it never disappeared completely. She asked about people's days, thanked them sincerely, and handed receipts with care. To most, these small gestures seemed ordinary. To the millionaire, they were extraordinary acts of strength. She was showing grace under fire, kindness in the face of cruelty. The manager, on the other hand, grew louder with each passing minute. His words sliced through the air like knives, sharp and unkind. He pointed out the smallest mistakes, blowing them out of proportion. A few customers shifted uncomfortably in line, their eyes darting from the cashier to the manager. No one dared to speak up, but the atmosphere had grown heavy. The energy in the store felt different now, less like a place of business, and more like a stage where cruelty played out while everyone else became silent spectators. The millionaire's thoughts churned. He remembered when he, too, had been in such a position many years ago, an ordinary worker trying to earn an honest living. He remembered the sting of harsh words from those who thought power meant permission to humiliate. He also remembered the silence of others who had witnessed his struggles but never stood beside him. Those memories, buried for years, resurfaced now with painful clarity. Watching this young woman endure what he once endured made his chest ache with a mixture of sorrow and determination. Still, he did not move forward. Not yet. He wanted to see the truth in full, to let the manager reveal himself completely. The millionaire knew that when the moment came, it had to be clear not just to him but to everyone who stood there watching. If he stepped forward too soon, the weight of truth might not be felt as deeply. But if he allowed the scene to continue, the manager's arrogance would become undeniable. He moved quietly to a shelf close to the register, pretending to study a box of cereal. From here, he had a clear view of the entire situation. He noticed the way the other employees sneaked glances at the register, their eyes filled with worry and helplessness. They wanted to help, but fear kept them frozen. Some busied themselves with tasks, while others lingered a moment too long, unable to look away. Their silence told its own story. This had happened many times before, and still nothing had changed. The cashier dropped a pen while trying to fill out a receipt slip, and the small clatter on the counter was enough to trigger another storm. "How clumsy can you be?" the manager snapped, rolling his eyes dramatically so the customers could see. "This is why things fall apart around here. Some people just don't learn, no matter how many times you correct them." His tone carried not only annoyance but mockery, as if belittling her gave him some strange satisfaction. The cashier's hands shook slightly as she picked up the pen. Her eyes glistened, but she kept her head bowed, refusing to let her tears fall in front of strangers. She whispered another apology, her voice almost lost in the noise of the store. Yet she continued to serve the next customer, greeting them with a polite smile, determined not to let the manager's cruelty steal her dignity. The millionaire clenched his jaw. Every part of him wanted to step forward, to end this charade immediately. But he forced himself to stay still, for just a little longer. He needed the truth to be so obvious that no one could deny it when the time came. The customers, too, needed to see the full measure of this injustice so that when he revealed himself, the impact would be greater. The line at the register grew longer, and the tension thicker. A young mother with a child shifted uneasily as the manager's tone rose again. The little girl clutched her mother's hand, sensing the harshness even without fully understanding the words. The mother gave the cashier a sympathetic smile, whispering a soft thank you when the items were bagged. Small acts of kindness like that seemed to give the cashier strength, like brief rays of light cutting through storm clouds. The millionaire's mind wandered to the core values he had built his company on: respect, fairness, dignity for every worker. Those were not just words in a handbook, they were promises, rooted in his own struggles. To see those values shattered in his own store filled him with disappointment, but also with resolve. He knew what had to be done. He only waited for the right moment, when silence could no longer excuse what was happening. The manager crossed another line when a small mistake appeared on the receipt. Instead of correcting it quietly, he raised his voice so loudly that nearby customers stopped browsing to watch. "This is exactly what I mean," he said, shaking the receipt in the air. "Careless, careless, careless. Do you even pay attention to what you're doing?" His words rang out like an accusation in a courtroom. The cashier froze for a moment, then corrected the mistake silently. Her hands moved quickly, but her face revealed the weight of shame she was forced to carry. The millionaire's eyes narrowed. This was the moment he had been waiting for. The cruelty was no longer subtle. It was blatant, undeniable, and witnessed by all. The manager had revealed himself fully, not as a leader, not as someone guiding his team, but as a man who thrived on humiliation. The millionaire took a slow breath. His heart pounded with the weight of the decision before him. He had seen enough. He knew the truth. But more importantly, so did everyone else. The customers, the employees, the cashier, they had all witnessed the same cruelty he had. Now, when he revealed who he truly was, the impact would be undeniable. The mask of authority the manager wore would crumble in an instant, and justice would take its place. He placed the box of cereal back on the shelf and straightened his posture. His eyes remained calm, but inside, a storm of emotions brewed. He knew that the next moments would change everything, not only for the cashier but for the entire store. What was once a stage for cruelty was about to become a stage for truth. And so he waited just a little longer, standing quietly among the crowd, preparing himself for the moment when silence would break, and justice would step into the light. The store felt heavier with every passing second. Customers shifted uneasily, employees kept glancing over, and the young cashier tried to hold herself together while the manager continued his harsh words. The disguised millionaire, standing just a few steps away, knew the moment he had been waiting for had finally arrived. He had seen enough. His patience had been long, but the truth was now clear to everyone in the store. The manager had revealed his heart, and it was filled not with leadership, but with pride and cruelty. The millionaire took a slow step forward, pretending still to be an ordinary customer. He placed a small basket of items on the counter, right in front of the cashier. She looked up with tired eyes, forcing a small smile despite the redness that clung to the corners of her eyes. "Hello, sir," she whispered softly. Her voice carried the weight of the day, but it also carried something else: grace. She was still giving her best, no matter how much she had endured. Before she could even scan the first item, the manager appeared again, his voice sharp. "Move faster. Customers don't have all day," he barked, raising his hands in frustration. He didn't even notice who stood before him, because in his mind, everyone was just another face to control. The disguised millionaire tilted his head slightly, studying the man who thought himself untouchable. "Is this how you treat your staff?" the millionaire asked calmly, his voice low but steady. His tone was different from the usual customers. It carried weight, though the manager didn't recognize it yet. The manager blinked, clearly annoyed at being questioned. "Excuse me? Who are you to ask me that?" he shot back, his words dripping with arrogance. "She's an employee, and it's my job to correct her mistakes. If she can't handle it, maybe this isn't the right place for her." The cashier froze, her hands trembling slightly on the register. The customers leaned in, sensing something unusual in the calm yet firm tone of the man who spoke. The millionaire looked directly at the manager, his eyes unflinching. "There's a difference between correction and humiliation," he said evenly. "And what I've seen here today isn't leadership, it's cruelty." The manager let out a mocking laugh, though it was thin and nervous. "Listen, sir, you don't know how things work here. I've been managing this store for years. If I say she's too slow, she's too slow. People like you don't understand what it takes to run a place like this." He straightened his jacket as if his position gave him a shield of authority. The millionaire placed his hands on the counter, leaning just slightly forward. His voice dropped lower, carrying a quiet strength that silenced the room. "I understand far more than you think." The cashier's eyes widened, her breath caught in her chest. The customers grew still, sensing that something important was about to happen. Even the employees nearby paused in their work, turning their heads toward the register. The air felt thick, every second stretching as the disguised man prepared to reveal himself. Slowly, he removed the cap that had shadowed his face. His simple jacket slipped open just enough to reveal the fine shirt beneath it. His eyes, steady and filled with authority, locked onto the manager's. And then, in a calm voice that carried across the entire store, he spoke the words that froze everyone in their place. "I am the owner of this store." Gasps rippled through the room. Customers turned to one another, whispering in disbelief. The employees stood frozen, their mouths slightly open, their eyes wide. The manager's face drained of color as his confident smirk melted into shock. He stammered, his words broken. "Why you, what? That's not possible." His arrogance crumbled in an instant, replaced by panic. The millionaire straightened his shoulders, standing tall, no longer in disguise but in truth. "Yes," he said firmly. "This store, this company, belongs to me. And I have come here today, not as a wealthy man, but as an ordinary customer, to see how my people are treated when no one is watching." He let the silence that followed sink deep into everyone's hearts. The cashier's hands trembled as she looked at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. The tears she had been holding back now spilled, not from humiliation but from relief. She had endured so much pain in silence, never expecting that someone with such power would stand beside her. The manager stumbled over his words, his pride collapsing like a house of cards. Sir, you don't understand. I was only trying to make sure things run smoothly. I didn't mean anything by it." His tone had shifted completely, from arrogance to desperate pleading. He reached for excuses, but none of them carried weight anymore. The truth had already been seen. The millionaire shook his head slowly, his voice calm but firm. "No. What I saw was not management. It was not correction. It was humiliation. You did not lift your employee up, you pushed her down. You made her feel small in front of strangers. That is not how a leader behaves. And that is not how my stores will ever be run." The customers began to murmur, nodding quietly in agreement. A few even clapped softly, as if to give support to the words they had just heard. The employees, who had once been silent in fear, now felt a wave of relief wash over them. For once, someone had spoken the words they had all kept hidden in their hearts. The manager tried again, his voice shaky. "Please, sir, give me another chance. I can do better. I can change." But his pleas fell flat. The millionaire's eyes, though calm, carried a weight that made it clear forgiveness would not come so easily. "You've had chances," the millionaire said softly. "And you chose pride over compassion. Authority over fairness. That ends today." The room was silent except for the hum of the store's air conditioning. Everyone waited for what would come next. The manager stood trembling, his hands twisting nervously, while the cashier wiped her tears, still trying to process the sudden turn of events. The millionaire looked around the store, making eye contact with the employees and even with the customers. "Let this be clear," he said in a steady voice. "This company was built on respect. Every person, no matter their role, deserves dignity. Anyone who forgets that does not belong here." His words echoed in the silence, settling into the hearts of everyone who heard them. Then he turned back to the manager. "You're finished here," he said simply. "Pack your things and leave." The manager's mouth opened as if to protest, but no words came out. His pride had been shattered, his authority stripped away. Slowly, with trembling hands, he stepped back from the counter. The sight of him leaving felt like a heavy shadow lifting from the store. The employees exchanged quiet glances of relief, and the customers nodded with satisfaction. The cashier stood frozen, unable to move or speak. The millionaire turned to her, his expression softening. "You did nothing wrong," he said gently. "You showed patience, dignity, and strength even when you were treated unfairly. You deserve respect, not ridicule." Her lips parted, but no words came out, only tears that rolled freely down her cheeks. The millionaire gave her a reassuring nod, a silent promise that her days of humiliation were over. And so, in the middle of an ordinary day, in a store filled with ordinary people, the truth had been revealed. A disguise had been lifted, a mask of arrogance had been broken, and dignity had been restored. What had begun as another painful shift for the cashier had turned into the beginning of something new, something filled with hope. The millionaire stood tall, his heart heavy but relieved. Justice had been spoken, and though the story was not yet finished, its turning point had arrived. The store stood in silence for a moment after the manager walked away. His footsteps echoed faintly, then faded into nothing, leaving behind an atmosphere that felt lighter, freer, almost as though the air itself had changed. Customers glanced at one another, whispering softly, while employees looked both relieved and stunned. It was not every day that the owner of the entire company appeared, revealed himself, and took such a strong stand. For many of them, it felt almost unreal, like a scene from a story they would tell again and again. The cashier, still standing at the register, wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand. Her eyes were red from holding back tears for so long, but in that moment, those tears no longer spoke of humiliation. They carried relief, hope, and a small but growing sense of dignity. She looked at the man who only minutes ago seemed like just another customer and now stood revealed as the very heart behind the business. Her lips parted, as if to speak, but the words trembled and refused to leave. The millionaire noticed her silence and gave a kind nod, the sort of nod that carried reassurance. "You don't have to say anything," he said gently. "You've already spoken louder than words with the way you worked, with the patience you showed, and with the kindness you never let go of, even when treated unfairly. That speaks louder than anything you could tell me." The cashier pressed her lips together, trying to hold back another wave of emotion, but she managed a small smile. Around her, customers began to clap softly. It started with one pair of hands, then another, until a ripple of applause filled the store. It was not loud or dramatic, it was gentle, respectful, and full of support. The employees, encouraged by the moment, joined in as well. For the first time in a long while, the cashier felt truly seen, not as someone who made mistakes but as someone who mattered. The millionaire waited for the clapping to settle, then spoke again, his voice carrying across the store. "This company was built on respect and fairness. Every person here, whether they are a customer, a cashier, or a stock worker, deserves dignity. If anyone forgets that, they forget the very foundation we stand on." His words were not angry. They were steady, calm, but filled with a strength that left no room for doubt. Everyone who heard them understood that change was not just possible, it was happening right now. Turning back to the cashier, he added warmly, "From today onward, your work here will not be defined by fear. You will not be measured by the sharp words of someone who failed to lead. You will be measured by your dedication, your kindness, and your courage. And for that, you deserve more. The cashier's breath caught in her throat. She blinked rapidly, unsure if she had heard him correctly. More, she whispered softly. The millionaire smiled, his expression gentle. Yes. From this moment, you will no longer be just a cashier. You will be promoted. I want you to help guide others the way you have guided customers with patience and with grace. People like you are the reason this company exists, and it is time your efforts are recognized. Her eyes filled with fresh tears, but these were not the tears of pain she had fought to hide earlier. These were tears of gratitude, of joy, of disbelief that someone had finally seen her worth. She nodded quickly, unable to form a full sentence, but her heart was overflowing with thanks. The employees who stood nearby exchanged smiles, some even sighing with relief. It was as though a heavy shadow had been lifted off their shoulders. They knew the manager's words had been cruel, but they had been powerless to act. Now, seeing the owner himself take such a firm stand, they felt stronger. They knew that fairness was not just a word in the handbook but something their leader truly lived by. One of the customers, an older gentleman with kind eyes, stepped forward and said in a steady voice, "It takes a good man to build a business, but it takes a great man to care for the people who work in it. Today, you've shown us you're the latter." His words were met with nods of agreement from those around him. The millionaire gave a humble smile, bowing his head slightly. "I only did what should have been done long ago," he replied. "Every worker deserves respect. Without them, no business could stand." As the store returned slowly to its rhythm, the employees moved with a lighter step, their spirits lifted by what they had witnessed. The cashier, though still shaken, carried herself differently now. Her shoulders were straighter, her voice steadier, and her eyes brighter. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she belonged not because she endured cruelty, but because her strength had finally been honored. The millionaire finished his small basket of purchases, but when the cashier offered to ring them up, he shook his head with a soft smile. "Today, you've done enough," he said kindly. "Take a moment. Breathe. Know that you are valued." He insisted another employee handle the transaction, giving her space to gather herself. As he prepared to leave, he paused at the doorway and turned back one last time. His eyes swept over the store, over the employees who now stood taller, the customers who had just witnessed something extraordinary, and the young woman who had shown him the quiet power of dignity. He felt a swell of pride, not in himself, but in the values that had guided him since his youth. Walking into the sunlight outside, he pulled his cap back on and blended once more with the ordinary crowd. To the world beyond the store, he was just another man walking down the street. But inside, he carried the knowledge that he had done something meaningful. He had reminded his people and himself that wealth is not measured only in money, but in the way we treat one another. The cashier, watching from inside the store, placed a hand over her chest. Her heart still pounded from the whirlwind of the day. She knew life would not suddenly become easy, but it no longer felt as heavy. She had been seen, defended, and lifted up by the very man who owned the company she worked for. That knowledge alone gave her a strength she had never felt before. From that day forward, the story spread quietly, carried from one employee to another, whispered among customers who had been present. People spoke of the day the owner came in disguise, saw the truth, and changed everything. For the cashier, it became the turning point of her life, a reminder that no matter how dark the day, dignity could shine brighter than cruelty. And for the millionaire, it became another chapter in his journey, proof that leadership was not about power or pride, but about protecting the dignity of those who worked with you. He had walked in as an ordinary man, but he left as something greater, not just a businessman, but a guardian of fairness. The store continued, the city moved on, and life carried forward. But for everyone who had been there that day, the memory lingered. It was not just the story of a disguised millionaire or a cruel manager. It was the story of truth revealed, justice delivered, and dignity restored.